This episode of Brains on Games is all about building the best garden. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to talk about a gardening game, which is something that I've never really done or been interested in doing even, but I was really interested in this game. A while back, I backed a game on Kickstarter from Starling Games. Starling Games are the folks that also created Everdell, which is a great worker placement game that we really like at our house. But this isn't Everdell. This is a game called Flourish. It's designed by some of the same people who made Everdell, but this is a game called Flourish. It's a game that you can play in only about 20 minutes. There's a solo version, but it plays all the way up to 7 players, so 1 to 7 players, and you can play it with kids aged 8 and up. Let's take a look at Flourish. I was excited about this one because, well, both because it's designed by people who designed a game that I really like, also because the artwork in this game is fantastic. It did take me a long time to put together all of the pieces, honestly. I didn't get to play on the same day that I opened up the box. But what you're trying to do in this game is create a garden that's going to earn you the most points. And you've got this great 3-digit point tracker here, which my son might have nightmares about because I really trounced him in the second game that we played. He beat me in the first one, so I guess that's okay. This is a game that's played over 4 rounds, and it's super simple to learn. You can play it cooperatively. We only played it competitively. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But there are cooperative versions in addition to the solo variant in the rules. So there's lots of different ways that you can play this game. When you're competing, you're trying to create the garden that's going to earn the most points, and you start the game with 6 of these cards in your hand with the nice garden gate on the back. These are great cards with the linen finish and everything. On the other side, they have the features that you're going to be putting in your garden. You start with 6 cards. Everyone puts 1 card in front of them in their garden face down. But the tricky part, and what I think makes this game interesting, is that the next thing you have to do before anyone reveals what card they've played is you have to pass one of the cards from your hand to each of your neighbors on either side. So you're going to wind up playing 3 cards altogether, but 2 of them are going to your opponents. You really do have to think ahead, and it's hard to do that on the first turn because you don't know what card they've played. But as their garden builds up, you'll be able to make more informed decisions about what cards you're giving them. The other thing that happens when you pass these cards along is that you can earn points in Flourish from cards that are in your neighbor's garden. So that does definitely add an extra wrinkle and I think makes the game interesting. Once you've played your card and passed your cards over the garden gate here that separates your garden from your neighbor's, everyone reveals at the same time and you score points. The immediate points that you get are the ones here on the left of the card. So there's 2 of these symbols here. I'm going to get 2 points, and I would add them onto my little score tracker here. And then you continue that process until you've got a row of 3 cards. In the final round of the game, you're going to have a grid of 9 cards, a 3x3 grid, and then you're going to put some other cards around the outside for the final round. And here are the 3 cards that are going to be in the top row of my garden. You can see that along the way, I would have scored a total of 6 points, but now we look up at the top of the card and I get to score some additional ones. So for each of these green symbols on the left-hand side of the card, I'm going to get 1 extra point, and that means I double from 6 to 12. This is an interesting symbol. The 2 heads with the line in between means that I look on either side to my neighbors, I choose one of them, and I'm going to get 2 points for each of these little fungus symbols that are in their garden. When you combine that symbol with the fact that you're passing cards back and forth, that's where I think you get that interesting interplay. I saved this one for the last card of the round, and maybe I would be trying to pass lots of these symbols off to my neighbors so that I'm going to score some extra points from them once I lay that one down and the round ends. You're going to find, as we go through the turns in the game, you're going to find that there's a lot of mental math calculations, and really you're juggling a lot of information in your memory. And when you're juggling information and manipulating information in your memory, that's an example of a working memory activity. Working memory, like we've talked about before, is the whiteboard in your mind where you keep information so that you can do something with it. And it's involved in lots of things like not just math calculations, but in multitasking. So kids who have trouble with working memory often have trouble remembering a list of things they're supposed to do as they're doing those things. So you might give a child a list of 3 things and they might get the first one done and then forget the other 2 before they're able to get everything finished. That's another example of working memory in action. And you're doing lots of working memory calculations here because you're keeping track of what's in your garden that's going to earn you the most points, what's in the gardens of the players on the left and the right, because you might have lots of cards that have these kinds of neighbor symbols on them, and you want to make sure you pass around cards to them that are going to earn you some points, and maybe you can trick them into playing those cards. Each turn progresses the same way. You play a card face down, you pass a card to each of your neighbors, you reveal the card you played in your garden, you draw a card. I didn't mention that. You draw a card so that you always have 6 cards in your hand. You're playing 3, 1 face down, 1 to each neighbor. You're getting 2 because each of your neighbors has passed you 1, and then you're drawing the 3rd one so that you always have a full hand of 6. At the end of each row, you do the end of round scoring, and then once you've got your grid of 9, for the 4th round, you don't draw an additional card. You play those cards that you have, and then you discard the extra ones that are left. You're going to play 3 cards on the outside, around the outside of your garden, to get those final end of round points. And then, after that 4th round, you do the end of game scoring. This gets interesting again because at the end of the game, these symbols often come into play. This is a pathway, and this is a symbol that's a gate. You've got trees and hives and things like that. Those might give you some extra points at the end of the game, like I said. So end of game scoring is in the bottom right of these cards. This is a great one because I can look at both of my neighbors on either side, and if they've played a gate, I get 3 points for each of those gates, and there are lots of different gates in the deck. Here's a pathway. I'm going to get 4 points for each of these green pathways. You've got a hive. Here's 3 points for any pathway, which is fantastic because I've got a few paths here in the game. I've got another 3 points, so I'm going to get 6 points total for each of these gates. And you can imagine that the player beside me might be watching this card and saying, I've got this gate here, which would be a great card for me, but it's going to give this guy 3 points at least. If he doesn't have another card like that, it's going to give him 3 points as soon as I play it. You are trying to do a little bit of planning ahead like that for the end of game scoring. Here's one where you would get 9 points if you could play 2 hives. And I've got 1 hive here, but I've only played 6 cards, so you don't get to see the whole grid. Hopefully I would have a second one so that I could score those points as well. And then the person with the most points at the end is going to win the game. Pretty straightforward, a good working memory exercise for anybody who wants to exercise those working memory skills. There was, though, in the box of the signature edition, the one that got sent out by Kickstarter, the same one that I think is on the Starling Games website, there's an expansion in the box called Friends and Follies. And these are some extra pieces that give you extra scoring options at the end of the game. So for the friends, they're these little cards with the green backs, and you draw 2 of them, and they're little animals that might be in your garden at some point during the game. This is a really good one. It's a dog, and a dog is going to score you 5 points for each of your lawns. Of course, a dog wants to run on the lawn. I think I've only got 1. Do I even have a lawn here? I didn't play the lawn card. I have it. It's right here in front of me. So here's a lawn. I wouldn't have scored it based on the 6 cards that you've seen, but I did have a lawn in the hand that I drew at the beginning of the game, so I could score 5 points for that. You're going to start the game with 2 of these friends. You can only score 1 of them. It gives you a couple of options, but you kind of have to think ahead about what card are you going to play. So the friends are going to help you earn some points at the end of the game. The follies are these features that you might have in your garden, these little 3-dimensional buildings, gazebos and stone. Here's a nice gazebo right there. This is why it took me so long to put the game together. These little cardboard things are tough to assemble, but they look great once they are. Each of these little buildings has a colored symbol on it that matches the symbols on the cards in the game, and what you can do at the end of every round, you can place as many of these as you want on an empty card in your garden, as long as it has the matching symbol on it. And if I put this here, that would mean at the end of the game, I would score 2 points for each of these symbols that are on the card that it's played on and on the cards adjacent to it. So to the left and right and on the top and bottom, not diagonally, but left and right and top and bottom. So here I would get another 12 points, even not counting the other cards that I might have around. I'd get another 12 points for this one because it's 2 points each. Here, this one doesn't have any of the flower symbols on the side, so you can't put one of these buildings right on top of it. But if it's adjacent to one of these little gazebo things, you get 3 points instead of 2 points for each of the flower symbols. You'd get 3 points for that one. And there's a different building for every color. I don't have all the colors in my garden, but I'll show you what they look like. Here's the mushroom thing, and this is the blue one, a little bridge. If those aren't put in the right spots, obviously, you wouldn't be able to play it like this in the actual game. What does this add? Well, there's one other thing I can mention about it before I say what it adds. Before you place them, you can shuffle around or move around the cards that you've played just that round. So the ones in whatever row you're working on, you can move the ones you've just played because sometimes you've drawn a card and maybe you could get a better orientation if you played them in a different order. But what you're doing now is you're thinking about what's adjacent and how are the cards placed relative to one another. And that introduces not only the working memory element of doing all those points calculations, but also it introduces a spatial element, a visual spatial element to the game where you're thinking about the relationships between the cards and what's adjacent to what. And that, in a nutshell, is Flourish with the Friends and Follies expansion. If you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave them in the comment section of the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and previous episodes are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.